God, we thank you for amazing grace. A grace that buttresses us, that holds us up. A grace that carries us through. A grace in times of difficulty and hurt and pain that you somehow reach to us. That in the midst of our questions, in the midst of our difficulties, in the midst of our even asking why, you don't desert us during these rough times. Father, we thank you. We thank you and we praise you for the truth of who you are today. God, as we look at your word, we pray this morning, as always, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts would be acceptable in your sight. Oh God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I don't know how many of you have heard of Tony Robbins. I've been a semi-fan of his for the past, now 30 plus years at least. And it's interesting because I got a note that Tony's turning 60. Like, that's unbelievable because he's only got about 4 years on me, and I thought, good night. I remember when the guy was in his 30s, and then I thought, well, wait a minute. I was in my 20s when he was in his 30s. And it's interesting because I don't have a connection to him personally, but I have a friend of mine that used to run a personal training business by the name of Billy Beck, and you can look him up. I went to Billy's company a number of years ago when he was in Weston, and we were in Rotary together and worked on a few projects together. Somehow, Tony has tapped Billy to be his personal trainer, and so everywhere that you see Tony go, Tony is 6'7", Billy is shorter than I am, so if you see the real short guy that looks, right next to Tony, that's Billy. And Billy makes sure that Tony stays in shape and doing all the things that he needs to do so he can continue to do what he does. I say that because Tony Robbins was the first one that I ever heard say, if you take care of the why-to, the how-to will take care of itself. In other words, if your why is big enough, you will figure out how. An example. If I said to you, and I've used this before, but if I said to you, you need to get $2 million by next Friday, how many of you think you could actually do it? Maybe. Now, if I said to you, I'm holding your family hostage, and I'm going to kill every one of them unless you get me the $2 million by next Friday, I bet you're going to put forth a ton more effort. And you may even figure out how to get it done, because now your reasons are big enough. When I was thinking about this Rethinking Church thing and what this whole thing is about, even yesterday I put a Facebook post on my own personal page about how much to me I've changed, and how much pastoring has changed, and how much church has changed. And sometimes it's changed for the good, and sometimes it's changed for the bad. I don't think because something was older, it was better, and I don't think because something new is better. I think it just is what it is, and I think that a lot of times churches have done a lot to do a lot of damage to people. They have done a lot to promote religiosity, to promote hypocrisy, to promote financial gain over everything else, instead of actually looking out for the people. One of the most popular scriptures that people will often go to try to understand what is a church supposed to be about? Because if I asked you, what is a church supposed to do? Why are we supposed to exist as a church? Why are we supposed to be here? You probably would have some interesting answers. And some of them may or may not be biblical. Some may be just ritualistic. It may be familial. It could be cultural. It could be any number of things. And so what we're going to look at this morning is looking at the why we are here and the power of that why. Because if your why is powerful enough, will change. In other words, if we have a powerful enough why as a church, as a local church body, we can not only change this community, but change the world. And there's something that winds up attracting people to it. I was talking about Tony Robbins. Has anybody ever been to any of these things? I actually heard him speak live one time. And somebody got me to go, and they gave me cheap tickets, so I went because I was cheap. And a bunch of churches and people were there, and I was like, wow, as soon as you get into that arena, there's this sense of you belong. You're in there, and you're like, and everybody energy's high and all that kind of thing. And if you listen to Tony, he gets you start to believing that you can actually make change. You could say, yeah, I can lose weight, or I can change my career, or I can do this, or I can do that. Everybody else is going, yeah, you could do this. And you're like, yeah. And you start to believe in yourself. Like you're like Rocky. You're ready to go in and just, go in the ring. Even though you've had no training, you're ready to go in the ring and do it. But you belong, and then you get this sense where you believe. And if you get the beliefs deep enough, then you start to behave differently. And then out of that behavior, you're so excited about it. Guess how Tony Robbins has filled his arenas for years without any more advertising. Remember years ago, if you're old like I am, you remember the infomercials? He used to say he was on between the Flowbee and the... anybody remember the Flowbee? That like vacuum thing that cut your hair? They had the Flowbee that was an infomercial. And Ron Popeil's Pocket Fisherman. Tony Robbins was in between there. Now, you know how he's filled the arenas? Well, he's done it on Facebook, but he's got so many people that say, you got to come see this. And they bring people. And I thought, my gosh, he took that from the church. See, we've had it wrong all these years. And I'm sorry if you've had a church experience where people have wanted you to behave differently before you can belong. I want to say that again. You can belong to us if you behave a certain way. When actually, often people have to belong for a little bit. And then as they belong to that group, they start to believe differently. Because there's other people believing in them. And as they begin to belong and to behave, to believe, they begin to behave differently. And they get so excited, they bring others. And they just keep repeating the cycle. And I thought, that's it. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's who we're... And then I was looking at Ephesians 4 and I went, wow! It's right there, but all of my professors were focused on all the wrong stuff. Because I was reading it, I thought, wow, what is... This is what Paul said here. Now, let me give you a little bit of background. Just in case, I like to set the background. In case you haven't been here, you don't know much about the Bible, that's cool. We're glad that you're here because that's we're who you're talking to. This is why we're here. We're all kind of fellow people on the journey that are hurting, and that's what this is all about. And so this book of Ephesians was what they called was a letter that Paul wrote, and it was what we call an encyclical letter. It was a letter that went to a bunch of different churches. And so Paul was writing and trying to encourage them. They were made up of Jews and Gentiles. All the different churches were. Many of them were meeting in houses. And so lots of stuff were going on, including, just like when you have something new that you're hearing, there are other people that come in and say, well, that's not the way it is. It's this way. And so Paul is beginning to kind of set the record straight with these churches and say, here's what you need to do. So we're going to pick him up in verse 11 of Ephesians 4. Again, it's page 948 in your Bibles on the pews. If you're on a device, we're in the New International Version. And here's what he says in verse 11. And I'm just going to run through this and then we're going to come back to it. So he says this, verse 11. So Christ himself, Jesus, the head of the church, gave, listen to this, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastors and the teachers. So he has quite the laundry list there. So he says, Jesus Christ gave apostles. Now, let me just tell you, somebody can give themselves the title of apostle today, but it's impossible for them to be an apostle today. Because an apostle was somebody that had seen Jesus face to face, followed him, experienced him, touched him, all of that. Now, if you tell me you've seen Jesus face to face, that's good. I would encourage you, though, to stop eating tacos late at night. Stop eating pizza too late. Because you probably haven't. It's okay. But there's not any apostle. But I notice there's people out there, religious leaders, who give themselves the name apostle. Because you actually don't. I mean, if you're apostle, you're at the top of the list, right? So nobody can question you. He says, Christ gave some apostles. So we're not talking about that today. But then there were apostles that were still alive. He says, God gave some apostles. Then he gives the word prophets, which could be used one of two different ways. People that were actually prophetic in nature. By the way, when somebody was a prophet in the Bible, do you know what their percentage time had to be, what percentage of the time they needed to be right in the Old Testament to be considered a prophet? Do you know what it was? 100%. You know what happens if you weren't 100%? You were a false prophet and they killed you. So you pretty much better be careful running around calling yourself a prophet. Now, prophecy came to mean something different where it was preaching and it meant proclamation. And then he says, and he gave some apostles, prophets, evangelists, people who were out there evangelizing and telling others they had these gifts. And then he says, these are the term pastors and teachers. Pastor is a poimen, the Greek word, it means shepherd. Teachers, we know what that means, it's people that are teaching. And he says, now he gave all of these people, now watch this, to equip his people. Did you get that? He gave apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers to equip his people. That's all his followers for works of service. Okay. Now, I need you to hang with me because I don't like to get into the Greek language unless it's important, and boy, is it important right here. And you may want to write it down. The word that he uses here for equip tells us exactly what the church is supposed to be about. Now, it's interesting because Dr. Howard Hendricks from Dallas Theological Seminary did a word study on this, and there are three uses of this word equip in the New Testament. Are you ready? The first one was used when it was talking about repairing a fishing net. Fishing was a big thing, of course, in the Bible. The disciples were fishermen. And of course, what would happen is when the net got worn out because of daily use, it would rip, the fish would fall through, and you couldn't catch any more fish. So every once in a while, they would have to come through, maybe weekly, and they would look and go, oh, got to repair this net. They're checking for the holes in the nets. And then they'd reach out and they'd sew it so they could use the net again because it got ripped in daily use. Second way it was used was of setting a broken bone straight. Anybody ever had a broken bone that they've had to set straight? I told you all about my daughter. I was there when they went. Then they had to actually take a titanium rod and put it back in place to set it straight so that it could grow straight and it would be useful again. It's broken. The third way it's used was of outfitting a ship for a long journey. You know, back then you couldn't stop down the intercoastal and go, oh, I'm going to get off at Shooters now. Oh, I'm going to go over here. Now I can stop and get gas. It wasn't how it worked. You had to have all of your supplies, and you had to be ready for the rough seas, and you had to be ready for the waves, and you had to be ready for the storms, and you had to be ready for people to get sick, and you had to be ready for everything. And he says, God gave these people, these leaders, to equip his people for works of service. Watch. The metaphors are so strong. Ripped nets. How many times do you as a person get worn out from daily use in life? How many times are you so overwhelmed? How many times do you go, I don't think I could do this, and you feel like you're a piece of Swiss cheese with holes all in it that nobody can put back together? How many times are you like, I'm tired and I can't do this anymore? Daily, catching, wearing, and tearing. And you think, I don't know what I'm going to do next. Sometimes when you come in here, you're just simply broken. Broken by grief. Broken by addiction. Broken by people that have let you down. Broken by life. Broken by loneliness. Shall I continue? Or broken? Broken. And trying to figure out, this is going to hurt when this gets set. But I got to get it set. And it's going to take some time to simply get back together and to mend again. That's what it's going to take. That's what we're going to have to do. So there's that brokenness, and there's that ripped part of us this daily use. But then sometimes when we're getting in here, one of the things that you have to realize is that you're going to continue to get ripped and you're going to continue to get broken. And so what happens is this edification, this building up, this adding to means also getting you ready to let you know you were broken once and you're probably going to get broken again, and you're probably going to get ripped again, and you're going to get tired, and you're going to run out of gas, you're going to run out of food. So we got to get you ready for this. And so he says, listen, here's what has to happen. When the church comes together, here's why you exist. And I've been asked, we've talked about it before at our church, and this is a big thing in churches. Who's your target audience? I love that question. Who's your target audience? Is it young people? Is it old people? I'm trending towards the other for me now. So if it's younger people, I'm in trouble. Who's our target audience? And that's it. It's what I realize. It's what I've been doing all my life. It's people that are ripped, people that are broken. And here's the thing that we all have in common. Whether you are 90 or 9, we all get ripped. We all get broken. We all have stuff. And we're all still on this journey. And Paul says, God gave some apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers to mend the nets, to restore the broken bones, to prepare them. And he says to prepare them to do what else? Now watch, hold on a second, because he says, so to equip his people for works of service. So the idea is that when your net gets mended and your bones get set and you get prepared, he says, guess what? You're now prepared to go out and help others and do works of service. The whole idea is, see this, again, so many years ago, now, and I can tell, I love being in one place long enough where I can tell the stories and there's nobody around that'll remember and can come back and say, he was talking about me. We used to do a Wednesday night prayer time. And I had first come here. And we had one woman that for some reason had this, she wanted to have this ministry to the widows, but that meant she wanted me to have the ministry to the widows too. So we would always do this thing where we would raise we'd say, do we have a prayer request? We'd have a prayer list. And she would raise her hand and she would say, it's really a shame that we're not visiting the widows. And I would say to her, so-and-so, is that a prayer request or is that a criticism or statement? And see, what she thought is, well, no, this needs to happen and you have to do it as the pastor. And I would say, listen, the pastor's not, as you see here, wasn't even the one that was doing it. Let me give you some further kind of insight into this in the scriptures. This is strange. And all the way back in the book of Exodus, Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, comes to him and he goes, Moses is worn out day and night. He's judging the people and he goes, what are you doing? He goes, probably his daughter probably came to him and said, hey, Moses is never home. Can you please tell him to do something? And so his father-in-law comes to him and says, this thing's not good. You're going to wear yourself out. You're going to wear the people out. And he says, you got to get some help. Now, this happens again in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, the apostles actually say this around Acts chapter 6. They literally said this. You can read this later. There was some demand that was going on because they had certain Jewish widows and certain Gentile widows that people were getting forgotten when it came to the distribution of food, which is how they were doing it in the early church. And so the complaints came up and they were like, okay, but then they said this, it's not right for us to wait on tables. The apostles said that. You were like, well, don't they sound like they're something now? They think they're too good to go serve tables. And they said, we rather need to give ourselves to prayer in the ministry of the word. And you know what was born out of that? The first deacons. You know what deacon means? At the Baptist church, it means that you're in charge. But a deacon actually means servant. Did you know that Do you know what the word ministry means? Anybody know? It translates service. In the King James, when Paul says to equip his people for the works of ministry, you know what he says? You all are ministers. You all are servants. And we all need to use our gifts, our talents, and our abilities to reach out to other people. My job, it's not my only job, but my job is to make sure that when you come in, that I'm helping you get the nets repaired, that I'm helping you restore the broken bones, that we're helping you prepare for a journey. And then when you go out of here, you go back to your places and you serve. And you repeat that with other people. Because he says, so all of this is done to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up. No, notice the words built up, not torn down. Some of you have been in churches where there's the great tearing down. It happens every Sunday. There's a tearing down. There's power struggles and political nonsense and all the things that go on, and you're like, man, this is why people don't go to church. And I think to myself sometimes, I wouldn't want to go to church either. And I'm the pastor if it was like that. And some of you have been in those situations. And if you haven't, welcome. I hope you never find that here. I don't think you will as long as I'm here. But it's just not who we're supposed to be. He says, we want to be built up. And now notice what he says here. Until we all reach, are you ready? The unity of the faith. Now notice he doesn't say the uniformity of the faith. Anybody have to wear uniforms for work? We have them in everybody's got to wear the same exact thing, Used to do school uniforms, everybody has to use the same. It's good when your kids are teenagers because you don't have all the garbage going on about, hey, they got this kind of jeans and that kind of jeans and this tennis shoes and that tennis shoes. But uniformity is not always good. Because what happens is nobody gets the chance to express themselves in their way. He actually says, till we get unified, but we don't have uniformity. That means that you and I can be unified about the big things and disagree on other things that simply don't matter and aren't important to Christ. Too many churches want everybody to agree on everything all the time about everything. We just got to agree on the big things. Some of y'all don't even know how to, never mind. I was going to make a comment about football and Dallas Cowboys. We'll leave it alone because I don't have any room to talk because they're not in the Super Bowl. But until we all reach the unity of the faith, and he says the knowledge of the Son of God, and we become mature, there's the word again, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Now watch what he says happens next. That we all no longer be infants tossed back and forth by waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning craftiness of people in deceitful scheming. So what was going on in the early church here, in this churches at Ephesus, is there were people that were coming in. Are you ready for this? They were coming into the church, and they were coming in with false doctrine, and they were coming in scheming, are you ready? Trying to rip people off. Does that sound like today? Nothing has changed. But what Paul says is, listen, when you do all of this, the idea is that you are not going to get carried away by it. That you're actually going to become balanced. That you're not going to be too far extreme one way or the other. And I had several illustrations that I was going to use this morning, and I shared with my wife, and I think she may have threatened to turn the volume off if I used either one of them, so I won't. You can ask me about them later. But the bottom line is that a sign of maturity is that I'm here. A sign of maturity is that I'm not given to extremes. I'm not tossed back and forth. Somebody comes in and says, this sounds good, and we go, oh, okay, I'm going to use dieting. And I always love to use dieting because I've lost 23 pounds, so now I can use dieting. That's how that works, right? If I gain it back, I'm in trouble. But it's like people go, I'm going to go to the keto diet. I'm doing a keto diet. Or I'm going to go over here. I'm going to do the Atkins diet. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to do this. Or I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do that. And it's like we go to these extremes that sometimes will work for a short time. And then we come back and we go, what do I do now? And he says, listen, don't get taken away by any of this. He says the whole goal is that what's going to happen is that we're not going to be tossed back and forth, but instead, now watch, another sign of maturity, speaking the truth. Oh, I stopped reading too early. Hold on. Speaking the truth in what? In love. That's what's important. Speaking the truth in love. It's interesting because when you talk about speaking truth, people are really good at speaking truth. I'm good at speaking truth. I'm good at speaking truth and speaking in a way that I can tell somebody, this is what you ought to do. This is how you ought to do it. This is what you ought to believe. But I want you to notice that as we talked about grace buttressing truth, remember that a few weeks ago? When we talked about Jesus, that grace is what buttresses and holds on to truth. He said, when you're speaking the truth, do it in love. That means that before I tell you truth, that the first thing that I have to think about is, how is this about to come across? You can say whatever you want. Truth is truth. It is. Truth is truth. If you don't like it, that's just how I say it. I get it, because I'd rather just speak it and have you deal with it. But that's not what he says. He says, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. Now watch. For whom the whole body joined and held together by every supporting ligament, by every supporting connection. There's the word. Connection. It grows and it builds itself up in love as each part does its work. I want to say this to you. The way I want to phrase this, if you want to sum all of this up, is we belong to build and we build to belong. Did you get that? We belong to build, and then we build to continue to belong. See, the whole goal of what we're supposed to do as a church is when everybody comes in this door, immediately they should feel a sense of belonging. And if you're not doing that, then it's a problem. We have new people that are coming in to membership, and I just have to tell them when they get to come up here and stand up, and we have to vote them in that came in. So we have new folks. You know what happens when new folks in? Everybody welcomes new folks like this until they get in their territory. Oh, I was glad they were here until they're doing what I'm doing. Right? But people need to feel a sense of belonging. And it's not just my job. I can't go around and greet everybody. The thing that does my heart so well recently is watching people at the end. It doesn't look like the rapture has occurred and everybody's gone as soon as church is out. People are hanging around and talking and doing all of that. Because we want people to feel a sense of belonging. A sense of, we're glad that you're here. Because see, belonging, that sense of connection, if they are connected, then we get a chance to start building together. We get a chance for them to come in, and you get a chance, and I get a chance to help mend the broken nets. To help set the broken bones. To help prepare them for this journey. They got to belong. Remember what we said? It was belong, and then believe, and then behave, and then they bring, and then we do it again and again and again. How simple is it? Because what Jesus referred to there is all about connection. When somebody says to me, what's your church's job? What do? It's so simple. I just tell them, our job is to connect people to God, to one another, and to our community. That's it. It's all about connection. Because when you hear the body works best when it is connected to one another. So get connected. What can we do to connect to this why? I'm going to give you 3 words, and they're real simple, and you've heard them before. You already heard one, love. So what is love? Don't complicate love. Just You can accept people where they're at without agreeing with them. We've said it 1,000 times. I got so many people that I don't agree with in my life, you just can't even believe it. And they would just be better if they would listen to me, but they don't. I love them, and they love me. It's kind of like family. You know, you fuss and you fight, and you're like, man. And then somebody says something about your sibling, you go, what are you talking to them like that for? Meanwhile, you just chewed them out. Because love is giving, which is our second word. Love and give. Give, yeah, that giving means giving of our resources, giving of our time, giving of our talent. It means all those things. See, each of you have some kind of a gift that you can give, that you can work with, and maybe we don't know how we're going to utilize that yet and what we can do. It's kind of like recently, we've had some families come in and we need to do something with children's ministries. Obviously, the people that work in children's ministries all week don't want to do that on Sunday. And I was always thinking, I've been in churches where they've had where they've had the kids in there, and then I suddenly had this epiphany of why. You know why we need the children's ministries? So that the parents can come. I'm not distracted by, believe it or not, I'm not distracted by people getting up and down and all the noise that goes on. And even the kids none of that phases me when I'm up here. I'm concerned. I'm not even concerned about you getting disturbed. I'm concerned about now the parents who come in that just need a little bit of a break for that week so they can worship uninterrupted. And I thought, there's our reason. So it's on the docket, and there may be somebody that's sitting here right now that goes, I could actually probably help with that. But I don't know that. But I'm telling you that now. So there's this, how can I use my gifts, my talents, my abilities, my resources? So it's love and it's give. And you know what the next one is? We've already said it. Find a way to serve. And I don't mean just serve in here, but some of the service occurs out there. I was at I go to the political things in the city, but I'll go to any one that I'm invited to so that I'm not taking sides. And I love going and seeing some of our we've got some people in this church that are so connected in this community, you would not believe it. And I mean, they know all the politicians, they know all the commissioners, and that's a good thing. So many people aren't involved locally in their community. I'm involved in mine in Cooper City and involved in this one. And I have to tell you, I can't believe when people don't even know who their commissioners are, who their mayor is, or anything like that. Do you know that often your taxes, side note, are being raised right underneath your nose in your community and you don't know it, and they're the ones doing it? It's important to know. So sometimes the service is being out there in the community at these various different clubs. It's maybe being a part of a Rotary Club or a Kiwanis Club or a Seniors Club or something else. Find a way to serve. Because when you are serving people and you are loving people and you are connecting with them and you are giving them a sense of belonging, guess what happens? They belong and they believe and they behave and they bring. And they belong, and they believe, and they behave, and they bring. And suddenly, lives are changed. Churches are changed. Communities are changed. And it all starts with you and me. So now I ask you, why? What is your why? Why are you here? It's important. I talk about doing things online. Everybody says, well, everything's shifting online. It is. And we need to connect online. But I mentioned earlier the Tony Robbins seminar. There's nothing like being there to feel the sense of belonging. You got to have it all. And just remember, there are so many people out there that feel so disconnected and just want a place to belong. Just belong. Just be next to you. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to lecture them. You don't have to convince them of anything. Just make them know that they are loved. And when they are, everything can change. Let's pray.